Chapter 1. The Tidings of Tenmarrie. A wind there was, sharp with the salt of the sea, which scourged the grey robes of Todd as he descended the long-worn steps of his tower. Of ancient stone it was hewn, a lonely spire whose peak was often lost in the swirling mists that clung to the shores of the long mood bay. The new risen sun, climbing from the grey waters, cast long and sorrowful shadows from the gnarled trees that stood sentinel upon the coast, and the air was heavy with the tang of the deep. But a deeper dread hung in the morning air, a chill that owed naught to the sea spray, thick as the fog that rolled in from the fathomless west. For ere the dawn had broken, a messenger had come to the tower's gate, spent and dying, bearing dire tidings from the village of Tenmarrie.
A shadow had fallen upon that place, he gasped, for a sorcerer of dark power had opened unhallowed gates, and from them had issued forth a host of things of foul devising. They were a ghastly mockery of the shapes of men, yet shapeless, writhing as if in a great and ceaseless pain. "The village, it is being unmade," the man had whispered, his voice a ruin of his throat. "They become things, naught but a congeries of gaping mouths and unlidded eyes, gibbering in their torment, their very flesh seeming to writhe and melt, as if in an unseen fire. They are become monsters."
Todd drew his pointed hat lower upon his brow, and his hand tightened upon the smooth wood of his staff, ancient and warm to his touch. A deep foreboding settled in his heart, a darkness that mirrored the messenger's tale.
"Monsters, do you say?"
Todd's brow was furrowed, and his gaze, which had been distant, grew hard as flint.
"Then it is a monster they shall find."
He turned to the failing man, and his voice was firm, though he felt a tremor of wrath deep within him.
"Be at peace now, for your message is delivered. I shall go to Tenmarrie."
A grim resolve took him, a cold fire against the encroaching dark. Horrors he had faced in the long years of his life, but the words of the messenger painted a vision of such grotesque violation as he had not known. He would not suffer this blight to spread. He would not fail these people. With a final look upon the messenger, whose spirit had now passed from its ruined vessel, Todd turned and set his face towards the waiting path, and his staff smote the stone with a steady beat. The path wound downwards, leaving the high air and familiar stones of his fastness, and went into the shadowed depths of the forest that lay about its feet. Ancient trees, gaunt and heavy with moss, clawed at the dim sky with crooked fingers, and the air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and slow decay. Oft had he walked through these woods, yet never had they seemed so oppressive, so watchful. A new malice dwelt there now, and he gripped his staff tighter, its known weight a small comfort against the deep unease that coiled in his spirit. What new evil was this that had such power to unmake the very forms of men? He put the thought from him, lest it master his heart ere his journey was begun. He would find his answers in Tenmarrie. He must. Then it was, as he went down into the deeper gloom of the wood, that he beheld a strange thing. Upon the path before him, the dry leaves of the past autumn stirred, not with the wind, but with a jerky, unnatural life of their own. They skittered and twitched across the stones, and their rustling was not as the rustling of leaves, but like the sibilance of secret speech, a thin, whispering tongue that no man could know. His heart filled with wonder, Todd followed where the leaves danced into the undergrowth, and there he came upon a simple wooden stool, set in the midst of the path, as if left by a careless traveller, though what traveller would come to this dark wood he could not guess. And as he watched, a single leaf, brown and sere, detached itself from a high branch and drifted down, not idly, but with purpose. As it touched the wood of the stool, a soft light kindled within it, a warm and gentle gleam against the shadows. For in the lore of his people were tales of such things, of humble objects imbued with a hidden power, and a wonder and a dread took hold of him. He could not leave it. Such power, left untended in this darkening wood, was a peril in itself, and a tool, however strange, might prove the only hope on the grim road that lay ahead. With careful hands, he lifted the stool. It was heavier than it looked, and the wood of it was strangely warm. He lashed it tight to the side of his old leather rucksack with a length of cord, testing the knots twice before settling the weight again upon his shoulders. He had not gone 10 paces down the path when he felt it. A faint tremor ran through the pack, a shudder so slight he might have thought it a misstep on the uneven ground. He paused, listening to the silence of the woods, but heard nothing amiss. Yes, as he took another step, a second stir came, a slow and profound shifting of the weight upon his spine, a movement that was not of shifting gear, but something else. It was a deep and deliberate lurch, as if a thing bound within the leather had drawn a breath and turned in its sleep. Todd froze, his hand flying back to the pack. The leather was still warm, but beneath his palm he felt a faint, rhythmic pulse, a slow and steady beat like a hidden heart. He shrugged the rucksack from his shoulders with haste and laid it upon the mossy earth. The stool, it was gone. The cords he had tied so carefully lay limp and empty, the wood having vanished as if it were never there. As he stared in disbelief, a voice, dry as dust and old as stones, spoke from the rucksack itself.
The exchange, it would seem, is complete.
The voice was weary rasp, a scholar's tone from a throat long unused.
The vessel for the power is given, and the power is accepted. A crude sort of bargain, but effective.
Todd took a half step back, his hand gripping his staff, his knuckles white. The pack lay still, yet the voice had come from it as surely as if it had a mouth of its own.
Who? What are you?
Todd's own voice was a hoarse whisper. There was a sound, like the crinkling of old parchment, from within the pack, and the voice spoke again.
I was a man, a scholar. Now I am what you see, a vessel, bound by a curse in leather and slivered thread, awakened by the very magic you sought to carry. You may call me Professor Pocketbottom. It is a name I have not had cause to use in a very long time.
For days they travelled, Todd and the rucksack that had once been a man. A strange companionship was forged between them on that lonely path. Todd spoke to the professor not as a thing of leather and thread, but as the scholar he was, his dry counsel a constant presence against the oppressive silence of the woods. He would set the rucksack down gently by the fire at night, and they would speak of histories and philosophies, of the stars above and the darkness that now threatened the world below. For the first time in a long while, Todd was not alone. They came at last to a grim and cluttered fork in the road, where the path was split into 3 under the boughs of a dying oak. The air grew heavy, a blanket thick with a fever damp that clung to Todd's robes. A chill rose from the very soil, a bone-deep cold that had naught to do with the evening air, and blackened roots, thick as a man's arm, had broken through the earth like the grasping fingers of a buried giant.
Foul ground, Todd,
The professor's voice observed from his shoulder.
There is a scent on the breeze. Old iron and older sorrow.
As he spoke, A shape coalesced in the deepening gloom, leaning against the trunk of the dead oak. It was the wisp of a man, his form thin as smoke and flickering like a dying candle flame. Beneath his ragged clothes, brands of some dark pact seemed to writhe on his too pale skin. His gaze was a hollow, haunted thing. A voice like the skittering of dry leaves on a tomb scraped the silence.
To Arion,
The shade rasped, its voice a torment to hear.
the quaking aviary. There stands the iron collar to the north. In it lies the key to sever the link, to tune the great disruption.
Todd held his staff before him, its familiar white a comfort. He had dealt with spirits before.
You speak in riddles, ghostly white. Speak plain. What is this iron collar?
The scholar's gaze, a void that held no rest, fixed on Todd.
It is a bell,
He said, his form wavering.
a great bell of forgotten craft. The sorcerer's magic is a song, a foul resonance that tears open the gates for those things. The caller can sound a single perfect chime, a counternote that shatters the frequency of his spell across all time. It is the only power that can make the portals quit.
A fascinating, if suicidal, proposal.
The professor murmured from Todd's back.
And this quaking you mentioned. Why does the aviary quake?
A tremor crossed the scholar's spectral face, a spasm of remembered terror.
Its potency is vast, its song immense. When the iron collar sings its awful peal, the structure that houses it trembles with such violence. The very stones threaten to come undone. To wake that slumber is a woe unreal.
The shade's form begins to thin, its purpose fulfilled, its energy spent. Todd watched the spirit flicker, its words hanging in the foul air.
Such woes.
He muttered, his voice grim. He stepped forward and gave the trunk of the oak a hard shove. The tree shuddered apart, dissolving in the gloom like dust on the wind.
Another impossible task on a road of impossible tasks.
Todd said to the empty air. He adjusted the weight of the professor on his shoulders.
If that is the only path, then to the north our weary feet must go.
They walked on in silence for a time, the gloom of the woods deepening around them as the last of the twilight died. The only sounds were the crunch of Todd's boots on the gravel path and the steady thumping of his staff.
A bell that brings down its own tower.
Todd finally grumbled to the darkness.
Of all the mad, desperate plans I have heard, this one might as well take the prize.
From his back, the professor's dry voice was a thoughtful murmur.
Madness is a matter of perspective. From a purely theoretical standpoint, using harmonic resonance to collapse a thaumaturgic conduit is rather elegant. It is the practical application that gives one pause.
Practical is a kind of word for it.
Todd retorted, sidestepping a thick root that snaked across the path.
The shade made it sound like we'd be trying to ring a dinner bell in the middle of an earthquake of our own making.
Indeed, a fascinating problem of engineering and acoustics,
The professor said. There was a sound of shifting leather, as if he were trying to get more comfortable.
but it is the singer of the song, not the song itself, that troubles me more. This sorcerer, the messenger who came to your tower, did he give you a name? A sigil? Any clue as to the identity of this evil wizard?
Todd shook his head, the moment slight.
Number just, dark power. The dying man had little time for introductions, Professor. He spoke of what was being done, not who was doing it.
And does that not trouble you?
The professor's tone held a new edge, the keen interest of a scholar confronting a missing variable.
We march north to counter a man's great work, yet we do not know if he is a renegade from the citadel, a hedge witch grown too bold, or something far older that has slumbered in these woods for an age. To strike at a web without knowing the spider's nature is to risk becoming tangled yourself.
Todd's footsteps faltered for a half-beat. He sighed, a plume of white in the cooling air.
The task is to stop the plague, Professor, to break the spell. The name of the man who cast it is a luxury we may not be able to afford.
Is it?
The professor pressed.
Or is it a necessity we cannot afford to ignore? To march blindly to this iron caller might be the very thing he expects. He may have wards there, traps. Perhaps this ghostly scholar was even a lure, sent to guide us to our doom. To know your enemy, Todd, is the first and most important battle.
Todd was silent. For a long moment, his bearded chin sunk to his chest as he walked. The logic was sound, as sharp and unwelcomed as a shard of glass in his boot.
And what would you have us do?
He asked, his voice low and weary.
Go door to door in this blighted land asking for whispers of a wizard who melts man.
Not so crudely,
The professor replied.
but we are walking into a war, my friend. It would be wise to have a map of the battlefield before we choose our ground.
Todd stopped and leaned on his staff, looking up at the first stars pricking the canopy of black leaves. He let out a long, slow breath.
The path is never straight, is it? Very well, Professor. You have the right of it. We seek answers before we ring this bell.
Their path to Iriaren took them deeper into the forest, into the cancerous heart where the very trees seemed twisted in agony. The cheerful sounds of the woods fell away, replaced by a silence so profound it felt heavy, as if they walked through a tomb. The air grew still and cold. They found their passage barred by a dark grove. It was a place where the natural order had been unmade. Thick, black roots, slick with some unwholesome sap, writhed in the soil like a nest of serpents, all straining toward a clearing at the center. There, in the heart of that corrupted wood, stood a single, crude monolith of greasy black stone that seemed to drink the very light from the air. Carvings snaked across its surface, glyphs and runs that seemed to shift and squirm at the edge of vision.
Gods,
The professor's voice was a strained whisper from Todd's back.
Todd, this is not sorcery as we know it. This is older, primal.
As if in answer, the shadows beneath the trees deepened, bleeding together into a patch of night so absolute it seemed a hole had been torn in the world. From this abyss of blackness, a figure emerged, a being of great and terrible height, clad in heavy cloak, woven from the absence of light itself. Upon its cowled head was a thing of crude taxidermy, a goat's head, its fur moth, eaten and foul, its glass eyes glowing with a dead cold light that promised nothing by misery. As its mantle of negation stirred, Todd saw that it had no body, but was a walking doorway to a sky of alien stars. A low hum vibrated in the air, a note that seemed to shake the teeth in Todd's skull. Then a voice spoke, and it was the whole grove that gave its tongue. It was a voice that did not enter his ears, but resonated deep in the bones of his skull. The whisper of the leaves formed its sibilance, the groan of the branches its vowels, and the shifting of the roots its deep and awful bass.
Ye are not the first to seek what here is writ,
The voice of the grove resonated.
nor shall be the last of your ephemeral kinds.
The goat head lowered in a gesture that was slow and deeply wrong. The alien stars within its form swirled.
The slight recalled what is, what was, what could become. To gaze invites a mind undone. To touch is to commit thy fate and blood to be rewritten. I am the guardian. State thy design, O mortals, and with cause. Prove ye are worthy of the price of knowing, or be turned back by these immutable laws.
Todd stood frozen for a beat, his knuckles white on his staff.
Professor,
He murmured.
Answer it.
The professor whispered back, his voice tight with a terror that was also a kind of academic awe.
Truthfully, it is too old for lies.
Todd cleared his throat, his gaze fixed on the dead eyes of the goat.
a plague is unmaking the people of this land. We seek knowledge of the sorcerer who commands it, so that we might end their suffering.
The goat head tilted, the gesture conveying an ancient, wearing understanding.
So be it.
The wood spoke.
The price confessed for knowledge is the journey in the dark of one's own self. The truest beast to quell is that which in thy own heart makes its den. Ye shall be unmade as by a mighty spell, and in the emptiness be forged again. Face what ye find, and make a truce with it. Then thy own mind, thus tempered, may bear the slate's great weight, and not in madness split.
The shade then stepped forward, a presence gliding on the air. Todd tensed, planting his staff into the soft earth, but he knew any resistance was folly. The guardian turned its attention not to him, but to the rucksack on his back. From its sleeve of void, a hand-like shape of deeper dark took form, a tendril of unlight that seemed to bend the world around it.
Professor, ye shall go first.
The grove voice stated, not as a challenge, but as a simple, terrible fact. Todd gave a wordless shout, a sound of pure rage, and thrust his staff forward, a bolt of silver energy lashing out from its tip. The magic struck the guardian and vanished without a sizzle, swallowed by the void of its cloak, as if it were a single raindrop falling into the black sea. The air grew heavy, pressing in on him, and a dreadful white settled on his will, snuffing his own power like a candle. He was helpless. He was forced to watch as the professor on the ground began to distort. The silver threads in its seams flared with a brief, pained light, and then, one by one, they began to snap. The old leather stretched thin, becoming translucent, and Todd could see the swirling alien stars of the Guardians from through the pack. It was being unmade, its very substance pulled apart like thread from an ancient, unraveling spool. The form of the professor, the thing of stitch and leather that had become his only companion, was drawn into that starry deep, consumed by an abyss so vast and cruel that Todd's mind recoiled from it. In a blink, it was over. The rucksack was gone. The ground where it had lain was empty. His back felt strangely light. The woods were silent again, save for the blood pounding in his ears. He was alone, standing before a bodiless thing of comic horror, and the man who had been his friend had just been devoured by the night sky. For the professor, the world was gone. He drifted in a grey, silent limbo, a place without up or down, warmth or cold, where the only reality was the ceaseless turning of his own thoughts. His being, his memories, his very essence, felt spilled and scattered in that timeless void. He was a mind without a vessel, a ghost without a past to haunt. The grey fled. He stood in a lightless grove of white trees, and he was a man again. He felt the phantom weight of his own limbs, the ghost of a breath, in lungs he did not possess. Before him stood the witch who has done this to him, the lady of broken branches. She was a queen arrayed in webs and splintered bone, with 2 great needles of polished wolf femur in her hands.
My loyal subject.
Her voice was the chill of steel in his soul. a sound he remembered with a hatred so deep it was part of him.
You have served your penance well, but the slate you seek holds a key to undo my work, to grant you flesh, to let you be a man again, free of my binding spells.
She held a needle high, its bone point gleaming.
But your heart, scholar, where does its loyalty lie? With this quest, or with the one who gave you life, however strange its form?
She wove a vision in the air, an image of himself as he once was, hale and whole, lecturing in the halls of the citadel.
This wizard, this Todd, cannot help you here. Forsake him. Swear your mind to me, and I will break the curse.
Her words were a sweet venom, striking not his reason, but the core of his spirit, where the aching memory of his lost flesh dwelled. A phantom feeling, the warmth of the sun on his skin, the taste of wine, the simple act of breathing, it all rose in him, a tempest of longing that mocked his living death. It was a mercy so cruel, it was an art form. His voice was a rasp of pure thought, not a defiance, but a confession.
O weaver of my woe,
His spirit cried.
you speak the truth. I see the man I was, and the scholar in me screams for you to grant this mercy. Each moment bound in leather is a silent torment. To be a thinking burden, carried as if dead, it is anguish that has no end.
He fell silent, letting the raw plea hang in the void, a soul confessing the weight of its own chain. For what strength had he? The memory of his true life was so fresh, so painful. And yet, as that black despair sought to consume him, another thought took hold, a fragile anchor in the gloom. A story only days, not years, old. A single man, a lone companion, who had looked upon his cursed form and still spoken to him as a man. This Todd, this quest, this bond so new and slight, it was the only candle in his endless night. He turned his thoughts back to the waiting witch, his mind now firm, though filled with a loss so vast it had no bottom.
The man I was,
The professor's thought went on.
would kneel and take your gift. I will not condemn his ghost, for he would only serve his own desperate need. But what I am, this stitched-up shade, has but one coin of honor to its name. A promise. He trusts me, and to shatter such a trust would be to turn my soul to dust and be more lost than I am even now.
He gathered what was left of his will.
And so I must refuse, not for a hero's pride, nor for the love of this dark form I must endure, but for the bond, with naught else beside. It is the only part of me that is not yet a ghost. This is my truce, to bear what I have become, to carry the grief for all that I have lost, and in suffering not to be overcome. I will pay memory's awful cost.
The vision of the lady gave a single, knowing nod. Her test was complete. She faded like a thought undone. The grey dissolved, the timeless void ceased, and in the heart of that great and terrible trial, the professor found a sudden, cold peace. A breath of wind, no colder than the last, stirred the leaves. The air in the clearing shimmered, and where before there was a nothing, the rucksack lay upon the mossy ground. It was whole, seemingly unharmed, yet Todd felt a change in it, a stillness that was not empty but full, a cold peace, as if its occupant had faced his own grave and felt no need to look away. He took a step forward.
Professor,
He asked, his voice rough.
are you whole?
I am as I was.
The dry voice replied from the pack, though it sounded impossibly weary, impossibly old.
And I have made my peace with it.
Before Todd could ask more, the guardian turned. The dead glass eyes of the goat head fixed upon him, and the world went silent. It was not a gentle touch that took him, but a look that pierced the mortal shell, a gaze that unmade reality, the familiar grove, the slate, the professor, it all dissolved like smoke. He stood in a great grey emptiness, on a floor of polished obsidian that reflected a man worn by long roads and endless battle. Around him, rising in curving tiers, sat a silent gathering of shades. The air was thick with the weight of their sorrow and the chill of their judgment. They were the ghosts of his life's work. A king with a phantom wound in his chest, the high priestess of a serpent god whose shrine he had burned, a dozen dragon lords whose empires were now naught but dust and song. From the heart of this assembly, a fallen monarch rose, his armor bearing the sigils of lost kingdoms, his broken crown a sliver of black iron. A mournful chorus of whispers rose from the shades, a judgment sharp and just.
Storm, breaker, unmaker.
They sighed.
You are the ending of things, where ages grew stagnant and traditions held fast. Your footstep was the coming of the fire and the flood. We were the lords of our domains, and you brought us only ruin.
The monarch's voice then spoke alone, attempting solace to a soul long steeped in battle.
Your road is done, Cataclysm. Lay down the staff and the spell. Your endless journey can end here. Dwell in the quiet dark. Accept your part. Be the reaper of the past, and find the peace you have denied to all. Let your weary spirit finally fall.
The offer was a balm on old scars. Todd felt the appeal of it down to the marrow of his bones. To simply stop, to lay down the endless weight of choice and consequence, to not have to fight another battle, to not have to watch another village burn. An end, he thought. Gods, just to lay it all down. He looked at the ghostly host, at the ruin he had wrought, and he felt no guilt, only a great and terrible weariness. He had not sought thrones or dominion, only to cut away that which was rotten.
You speak of ruin.
Todd's thought replied, the words not spoken, but simply known in that grey place.
Your realms were stable, yes, and stagnant. You called it peace. I called it a slow death, a rot that festers in the heart of all things that refuse to change.
He met the sorrowful gaze of the fallen monarch.
I am the storm that breaks the binding ice. My work is not to build, but to clear the ground. I break things because they are already broken. What comes after is not my concern. My work is the ending of things.
He felt the weight of their judgment and refused to bow.
Forgiveness? From you. Your judgment is as dead as your kingdoms. I did what was necessary. My path is etched in ash and blood, and I would walk it again. I am not finished.
His will was a shard of ice in that grey hall.
Let me pass.
The gathered shades did not yield so much as simply fade, their judgment having no power over a man who had accepted his own nature so completely. The sorrowful chorus dwindled to nothing. The grey dissolved. The obsidian floor grew dim. In a blink, he stood again in the corrupted grove. The air was cold, the shadows deep. On the ground beside him lay the professor, waiting. The trials were done. They were not whole, nor were they healed, but they were deemed worthy. And before them, the slate waited, humming with a terrible knowledge. Todd looked at the professor. There were no words to be said. They had come this far together, and this last step must be taken the same way. He knelt, placing his palm flat against the greasy, cold stone. From the rucksack beside him, a single leather strap snaked out and touched the monolith. The touch was not of stone, but of ice and fire. A shock of cold that stole his breath, then a searing heat that burned not his skin, but his mind. The grove, the slate, the world. It was all gone, replaced by a tempestuous flood of raw horror. It was no script or ordered telling, but the thing itself. He stood in the fields of Tenmarrie. Though he had never been there, he smelled the stench of acid and burning flesh. He saw the faces of the villagers, women he'd never met, children he'd never known, as their bodies lost all semblance of form. He watched them melt and run together into a single, heaving mass of bubbling skin, a congeries of unlidded eyes and gaping mouths that gibbered and wept in a chorus of ceaseless agony. And worst of all, he felt his own mind begin to fray. His sense of self, the core of who he was, began to slip beneath the tide of that mindless, babbling symphony. He felt his own mouth begin to part, a meaningless sound rising in his throat, a desire to join the chorus, to let go, to be unmade. He fought against it with all his will, a drowning man clawing for a surface that was not there. Then the vision fractured, like a shattered mirror. He saw flashes and omens flung like shards of glass. He felt the deep, bone-jarring quake of a great bell swinging, though it made no sound. He saw a man in a steel helm with a cross slit for a face, sitting on a crude throne of stones, his shoulders shaking with a grief so profound it was a physical force. He saw the shadow of a witch, her bone needles poised over the professor's form, a silver thread glinting with menace. For the professor, it was a deluge of pure, awful reason. His scholar's mind, unshielded by a physical form, was laid bare to the cold, intellectual torrent of the slate. The why consumed him. He saw the cosmos, not as a thing of beauty, but as a vast and intricate design of terrifying logic. In his mind, an eye took shape, a floating sphere of jaundiced flesh, crowned with lesser eyes on quivering stalks that blinked with paranoid perfection. It was a being of pure intellect, and it saw a flaw in creation, the messy, unpredictable, private nature of the soul. Its solution was a state of being it called the Great Silence, the unmaking of all minds, the purging of all memory and will, merged into a single, babbling chorus, a symphony of thought consumed by its own sound, eternally. He saw the fleshy mounds of Tenmarrie not as a horror, but as the first foul notes of that final symphony. Then a second vision pierced the haze, the wizard, a man in tattered scholar's robes and a steel helm. The professor felt the man's crushing grief, the weight of a broken promise made beneath a dying sun. He had made a pact with the great eye, a bargain to mend a world undone, and in doing so had damned another. Pity took root in the professor's soul. The final foe was but a bitter fruit from a familiar garden, a scholar who had lost his way. But knowledge has a terrible price. As the vast cosmic truths of the slate flooded his consciousness, they began to scour away the small human truths that had defined him. He tried to call to mind the face of his wife, and saw only the weeping cross-slit of the wizard's helm. He tried to remember the name of the halls where he had taught for so long, and his mind returned only the chilling phrase, the Great Silence. The man he was, his own small human past, was being shattered, rendered into dust and smoke by a truth too vast for one soul to bear. When the professor's strap slid from the stone, Todd was already on his feet, breathing heavily. They were back. The one, a vessel for the dreadful why, who now understood the cause, but was losing the very memories that made him a man. The other, who bore the raw and bleeding horror of the what, and the fractured visions of the grim path ahead. They were two halves of a single, tormenting truth. They did not speak. Bound by this cursed knowledge, they had no choice but to see it through.